This is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from the hills of Kalamata, Greece on April 6, 2024 with my latest rant of the week. The subject of my rant this week is, as in the prior two rants, some, shall we say, unflattering commentary about me on social media. And before I get into this commentary, I just want to say I don't want people to form the impression that because the first three rants of the week that I've done since I launched this initiative were about unflattering social media commentary about me, that I'm somebody who has thin skin. Believe me, if I had thin skin, I would have withdrawn from the public discourse years ago. Because when you articulate the kinds of opinions that I've been advocating and defending, which depart so dramatically from the mainstream narrative, it is an unfortunate reality that you're going to take a lot of abuse. The reason why in these three episodes I've focused on these unflattering comments is not because I don't even take it personally, frankly. I mean, the vast majority of this stuff it just comes off me like water off of a duck's back. But I thought that these particular comments and the one I'm going to talk to you about today provided a useful context for talking about some issues that actually are very important to society at large. And this particular comment raises the issue, very, very important issue: what is the nature of real journalism? So the comment in question was made by somebody who goes by the name of Visitors Digest. At Visitors Digest, this person follows me, and given what they said about me, I'm not sure why they would follow me, but anyways, all I know about this person, and they only came to my attention when they made this comment about me a couple of days ago on Twitter, is that they claim to be a retired journalist. And just for the ease of argument, because I don't know who they are, and I don't know if it's a male, a female, a non-binary person, I have no idea, I'm just going to refer to this person for ease of reference as Mr. Journalist. So Mr. Journalist fastens upon a tweet that I put out a couple of days ago in which I notified my followers that I was about to publish an interview that I had done of the Director of International Relations of the Lebanese political party Hezbollah in late March. And I noted in my tweet about the pending publication of this interview, I noted honestly that, to my knowledge, this is the first time that a Canadian journalist has interviewed a senior figure of Hezbollah. So Mr. Journalist gets all worked up about this and says, "You are not a journalist," putting "not" in cap letters. "Journalism is all about fairness, objectivity, and balance, and you have none of these." So I thought, again, if you think that, why do you follow me? But anyways, I responded by saying, I noticed that you describe yourself as a retired journalist. Hi, doggies. And I wonder, what news organizations did you work at in the course of your career? So he shoots back right away and he says, "I worked at CTV, CBC, and ABC. Moreover, I taught journalism for several years, and I went to journalism school." Did you go to journalism school, Mr. Journalist? And at that point, I had to unload on him. I mean, the attitude, frankly, was pathetic. And what I said to him was, look, if you think that CTV, CBC, and ABC, the news coverage at these organizations is characterized by fairness, balance, and objectivity, you live on planet Mars. And furthermore, the fact that you taught journalism and got a journalism degree means nothing, because most of the propagandists who work at these media organizations also have a journalism degree, some of them from elite journalism schools, and all they do is spew propaganda on behalf of the elites. So I don't see that going to journalism school as any kind of an assurance that you're going to do actual journalism. Now, I don't know how he responded. I really wasn't interested to see his response. But I want to say something about the underlying attitude of this individual. And let me just start by pointing out that it's very easy to critique a fellow journalist's work when you yourself are hiding behind a fake identity. I cannot subject his so-called journalism to scrutiny because I have no idea who this character is. However, I'm not hiding anything. Every single thing that I've ever written journalistically, in fact, every single comment I've ever made on social media, I make under my own name. I'm not hiding who I am from anybody. So he can easily identify the hundreds and hundreds, I mean, at this point, it may actually be thousands of journalistic reports that I've done over the 12 years that I've been doing journalism. And he could critique them to his heart's content, but I can't critique him because I don't know who the hell he is. And you know, I don't think that's particularly balanced. I don't think that's particularly fair, Mr. Journalist. You got it there? But let's put that aside. More pertinently, I don't think that fairness, balance, and objectivity are skills that you acquire at journalism school. I view them, and I could be wrong about this, more as values. Values that you acquire or that are instilled in you, usually in your formative years by people, whom you trust as a young person. Maybe later in life you meet somebody who inspires you. Maybe that person's a journalist. Maybe that person comes from some other walk of life, and they, exhibit to you the qualities of fairness, objectivity, and balance. And you find these qualities to be admirable, and you decide that these are values that you yourself espouse, and that you want to exhibit these qualities yourself in your dealings with your fellow human beings, whether it's in a journalistic capacity or otherwise. So I see these as values. I don't think that these are things really that any journalism professor can teach you. What a journalism professor can teach you are the core skills, not the values of journalism. They can't teach you to have those values and to practice those values. They might tell you what values they think are important to good journalism, and certainly fairness, balance, and objectivity are, but they're not going to somehow magically transpose them from their own body to yours. What they can do, however, is help you to develop the skills, the core skills of journalism. What are the core skills of journalism? In my opinion, the core skills of journalism are effective communication, whether by means of the written word or the spoken word. Secondly, the ability to evaluate evidence, the credibility, the consistency, and the completeness of a body of evidence in support of some hypothesis. And thirdly, you need to know how to ask a question and what questions to ask in order to get at the truth, particularly when you're dealing with a clever or evasive witness. Now, these just happen to be the core skills of litigation. And I've been a litigator for over 30 years. And in fact, these are skills that you can develop in other callings and professions and jobs as well. You can actually just develop these skills through your own personal study. You don't have to go to journalism school in order to be an effective communicator or to know how to analyze a body of evidence and how to marshal evidence or to know how to ask questions. In fact, every one of us, we all have the capacity to be citizen journalists. Journalists on a part-time basis, maybe on a pro bono basis, maybe we do it to supplement our income, who contribute meaningfully to the public discourse by means of journalism. We all have that capacity. In fact, I would encourage everybody out there to think seriously about devoting some of their time to producing good journalism. But at the end of the day, you don't need to have a degree. You don't need to go off for 3 or 4 years and spend 100 G's or whatever it costs nowadays to listen like blowhards like Mr. Journalist tell you about fairness, balance, and objectivity at CTV, CBC, and ABC. The other thing I want to say about these organizations, why would I question the fairness, balance, and objectivity of these so-called journalists working at these corporate media outlets? Well, because they are for-profit organizations. The people who control them, didn't spend hundreds of millions or even billions of dollars to acquire control of these organizations so that they could advance the cause of truth. These are extraordinarily rich people who are obsessed with their own wealth and power. And if they're going to spend that kind of money, they're going to plop down those kinds of bucks on a media organization, you can be damn sure it's going to be because they want to manipulate public opinion to their own advantage. For example, to get people elected who are going to lower their taxes, to get people elected who are going to lower other social charges which their businesses have to pay for the benefit of their employees, to deregulate, for example, from an environmental perspective, so that they can lower the costs of production and increase the risks of environmental damage to the general public. That's what they're going to do, and that's what they do, and it's been demonstrated historically, year after year, for decades on end, that that's precisely what the owners of for-profit corporate media do. And I remember once I had this debate with a guy who worked at one of these organizations, I think it was the National Post. And I knew this character, I can't remember his name, but he definitely had a neoliberal orientation. And he said to me, he knew of my critique of the corporate media. He goes, no one ever pressured me at the National Post not to write a story the way I wanted to write it. And no one ever pressured me not to write a story at all, even though I wanted to write the story. I never saw any evidence that these people were trying to manipulate me into advancing a certain agenda. And what I said to him was, well, that's because you think like them. And that's why they gave you the job. They don't have to pressure you because you ascribe to their ideological orientation. And they know that you will faithfully promote their agenda without them having to put the slightest pressure on you. And I know lots of characters like that, frankly, in the corporate media. Their political orientation is aligned with that of their owners, and that's exactly why they got the job. I, on the other hand, don't get any money from journalism. I don't even get reimbursement for my travel expenses when I report on the ground. So nobody can attribute to me any kind of a financial motive for giving you the news in the manner that I give it or talking about the stories that I choose to cover. Now, I also want to say something else about, the politics of journalism. There is no such thing in this world as an apolitical journalist. I mean, if you're a living, breathing, human being with organs and a brain and blood coursing through your veins, and you're doing journalism, your journalism is going to be influenced by your political opinions. You're going to have political values, you're going to have political opinions, and invariably that will inform what stories you choose to tell, what facts you choose to highlight, and the way in which you frame those stories for the benefit of your readers. It's inevitable. All of us must make a good faith effort to include in the reporting facts which undermine the narrative, the central thrust of the article or the hypothesis that we're advancing. That we have to give readers the ability to consider countervailing information so that they can make up their own minds. I agree completely with that. But don't tell me that, there's some journalist out there who is actually completely apolitical and is not influenced by their political views in how they tell the news, how they write the news. That doesn't exist. And so what we must do as journalists, frankly, is tell people where we stand politically. What are our views? What are our values? And I've done that from day one. I'm not hiding what how I view the world and what things matter to me. I'm an anti-imperialist, as everybody who follows my reporting knows. I am hotly opposed to the mere existence of poverty in our society. I think it's entirely avoidable. It's a political choice we make, that there's poverty, and we have a responsibility, all of us, to bring it to an end as quickly as possible. I'm against militarism. I'm against war. I'm fiercely opposed to even a hint of racism. These are the values and others that inform my reporting. I've never been shy about that. And if reporters are out there hiding from you what their political predilections are, which is something I definitely do not do and would never do, then frankly, I think that they're failing in their responsibility as journalists, because you have a right to know where they stand. Now, the last thing I want to say about the for-profit media is that, polls have shown, Mr. Journalist, I'm addressing myself now to you, that Canadians and the citizens of other Western countries have a remarkably low level of confidence in the legacy media. So for example, in 2022, the Reuters Institute did a poll in Canada in which they asked people the following question: do you trust most of the news media most of the time? Only 42% answered yes to that question. Now think about that question. Basically what they're asking is, do you trust at least 51% of the media at least 51% of the time? That sounds to me like a pretty damn low bar. And yet only 42% of the public said yes. Perhaps Mr. Journalist and those like him, and the mainstream media are full of people like this character, should think about, honestly, self-critically, with self-awareness, why is it that fewer and fewer people trust the corporate media? What is going on here? Well, they don't trust the corporate media because they figured out, like I did relatively late in life, that the people who control these organizations aren't interested in disseminating the truth. What they're interested in doing, and this is why they buy these corporations, is to manipulate public opinion to their advantage. In other words, to prolong and enhance their power, their wealth, and their privilege. That's what people have figured out. And people like Mr. Journalist, you know how they explain this to themselves? They say, well, some foreign government, the Russians, the Chinese, those damn Ruskies, they have polluted the public discourse with disinformation, and it's causing people to mistrust us even though we are the ultimate arbiters of truth and can be completely relied upon to inform the public. And I think that, in fact, Mr. Journalist probably is the kind of elite journalist who would try to explain away public mistrust in that manner, because if you look at his Twitter feed, it's full of all kinds of nonsense about foreign government interference in Canadian politics. He seems completely oblivious to the fact that the foreign government, which interferes more in Canadian politics than all other governments on earth combined, is the United States government. And nobody ever wants to talk about that in the mainstream media. You're going to talk about foreign government interference in Canadian politics and not even acknowledge the existence of U.S. government influence over Canadian politics? I mean, are you kidding me? In any event, I want to close out this rant by talking about a Toronto Star article that was just published. I think this really sort of drives home the point that I'm trying to make about a total absence of fairness, objectivity, and balance in the mainstream corporate media in Canada. The Toronto Star, as many of you will know, is reputed to be, of all the major news organizations in Canada, the most progressive, or one of the most progressive. So you'd think if any newspaper was going to give a fair shake to Palestinian solidarity protesters in the mainstream media, it would be the Toronto Star. So the Toronto Star publishes an article yesterday about the policing in Toronto of Palestinian solidarity protests. And the headline is something like this. It's not exactly this, but it's something like this. Police say that the costs of policing the protests related to the Israel-Hamas war exceed $12 million. Now, first of all, I really wonder if there's a single journalist in the entire mainstream media in Canada who understands the following distinction. The distinction between a war against Hamas and a war against the civilian population. The reason why we are out there protesting, tens of thousands, and frankly, it's probably hundreds of thousands of Canadians now, in the last 6 months, is because we object strenuously to the war being waged by Israel on the civilian population of Gaza, which, from a legal perspective, constitutes a genocide. What we are protesting is not the Israel-Hamas war or the war of the Israeli military against Hamas fighters. We are protesting their war on the civilian population. So if you were actually being fair, balanced, and objective in reporting on these protests, you would refer to them as protests against the alleged genocide in Gaza. I say alleged not because I think it isn't clear that this is a genocide. Oh, it's clear. It's absolutely clear to me as a lawyer that this is a genocide. I say alleged simply because it is true that as of yet, no court of competent jurisdiction has rendered a final determination on South Africa's allegation that Israel is committing genocide. There's only been a preliminary determination. It's plausible that Israel is committing genocide. So the fair, balanced, and objective way to report these protests is protest against the alleged genocide in Gaza, not protest against the Israel-Hamas war. Then you get into the meat of the article, and it's all downhill from there. There are 17 paragraphs, 14 of them quote verbatim or summarize statements made by the police. Not anywhere in this entire article are any of these statements made by the police analyzed critically or treated with a hint of skepticism. Nowhere in 17 paragraphs, not one paragraph quotes a Palestinian solidarity protester. Not one. You'd think that out of the tens of thousands of Torontonians out there who've been dealing with this increasingly heavy-handed policing of these protests, they could find one person to respond to the nonsense that the police spokesperson is spewing to the Toronto Star. But no, not one. They couldn't even find a lawyer who has reservations from a constitutional perspective or from the perspective of the criminal code or whatever as to how the police are policing these protests. No dissenting voices whatsoever from the so-called fair, balanced, and objective Toronto Star. just 17 paragraphs of lies, out and out lies about what is happening at these protests, and one in particular. Now, I say lies because I spent 2 hours speaking this week to people who participated, multiple persons who attended and participated in the protest which provoked these statements from the Toronto police, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. I also saw videos of the protest, multiple videos. I saw a summons that was issued, a copy of a summons that was issued by the police to a person who was driving the truck. And I heard accounts from multiple sources who were there about what the police actually said to the person who was driving the truck. And I can say, based upon my due diligence, that what the police are saying in this Toronto Star article is a pack of lies. In particular, I'm not going to go through every single one of them, but in particular, the article, at bare minimum, implies, if not asserts outright, that protesters targeted police with violence. What in fact happened at this protest, all the accounts that I've read and all the videos I've watched lead to the same conclusion, is that the protesters were peacefully marching in downtown Toronto. At one point, the cops decided to form a line across the street where they were walking down, where there have been many protests in the past, heavily armed cops, shoulder to shoulder. They blocked them. Then another bunch of cops, and there were apparently over 200 of them there, began to kettle, dozens of protesters, pushing them, brusquely, for no reason, into a corner, trying to isolate them from the other protesters and create some space in the middle of the protest crowd. And then all of a sudden, something like 7 big burly cops on 7 huge horses come charging into the crowd and knock people over and intimidate people, scare people. Some people ended up getting injured. 3 persons, I was told, at least 3 persons had to seek treatment at a hospital. And the police are telling the Toronto Star that the protesters initiated violence against them. There was virtually an army of cops out there. These people, we're seriously going to believe that these people who are out there protesting against a genocide decided to target the cops with violence when they're basically an army out there, heavily armed in riot gear, some of them with assault weapons? Are you kidding me? Now, you don't have to believe me for purposes of my rant. All I would say to you is, if you actually believe in balance, fairness, and objectivity in journalism, why didn't the Toronto Star test in any way, shape, or form the claims that were made by the cops by, for example, interviewing at least one of the people who was actually at this protest, or a lawyer who represents one of these people? Why? Because the corporate media isn't there to be balanced, fair, and objective. The corporate media, Mr. Journalist, is there to serve the interests of those who own them. And that's my rant of the week on April 6, 2024.